Hello and welcome again to Sport Unlocked, the podcast giving you the lowdown on the week's sports news. As ever, we're grateful if you can hit subscribe so we automatically land in your pod feeds. To hear from myself, Rob Harris from the Associated Press, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, and Martyn Ziegler from the Times. Well, we're beginning with a focus on swimming and a big announcement from the governing body of aquatics, FINA, on transgender participation, and that is banning transgender athletes from competing in women's categories.
Yeah, this is a sort of fairly major decision for international elite sport. And I think prompted by the emergence of Leah Thomas in the US college swimming, somebody who had sort of blitzed some women's records. And so Leah Thomas had raced for the college in the male teams and then transitioned a couple of years ago. So what FINA have done is they've said, in elite competition, anyone who's been through male puberty cannot compete as a woman. Now, that has been welcomed by a lot of sort of campaigners, people like Sharon Davis we've had on this podcast, but it's infuriated pro-trans groups who believe that's transphobic.
Well, Martyn, we talked about this issue, I think, on several of these episodes. It's been kind of the red button issue for sports over the last couple of years, and it's that thorny question about fairness versus inclusion, right? Whether it's fair to the other competitors or whether sport should be inclusive. And for swimming, they've gone for fairness.
Well, the decision came at FINA's Congress in Budapest. 71% of their national federations backed the rules, and one of the athletes to support FINA was the Olympic champion from Australia, Kate Campbell, and this is what she had to say in Budapest.
To put it simply, without fair competition, sport in its elite form would cease to exist. Now, usually inclusion and fairness go hand in hand. To create a place that is inclusive is to create a space that is fair. Transgender, gender diverse, and non-binary athletes' inclusion in the female category of elite sport is one of the few occasions where these principles come into conflict. The incongruity that inclusion and fairness cannot always work together is one of the reasons why it is so difficult to talk about this topic. Usually they are terms of absolutes which work together, yet science now tells us that in this issue, they are incompatible. That men and women are physiologically different cannot be disputed. We are now only beginning to understand and explore the origins of these physiological differences and the lasting effects of exposure to differing hormones. Women who have fought long and hard to be included as equals in sport can only do so because of the gender category distinction. To remove this distinction would be to the detriment of female athletes everywhere. The creation of this policy did not stem from feelings, what we felt was the right thing to do. The policy was created with the inclusion of medical professionals, legal professionals, athletes, coaches, and people from the transgender community. It is a policy that pays attention to inclusion, but prioritizes fairness.
I mean, if somebody has those feelings, obviously they're more at liberty to feel that. But yeah, I do understand why people look at Leah Thomas and say that's unfair, and this is somebody who raced as a man who's now taking a woman's place. I think the FINA decision is actually quite a good one, but it is going to be absolutely controversial for people like Leah Thomas. It means she won't be able to compete in these elite competitions. So what happens next? Sounds like they're going to have an open category, whether that's men. That replaces the men's category. I think that's probably quite likely. I've been trying to push the International Olympic Committee to say whether they would accept that at the Olympics, and they've sort of straight battered it. So that they will hold talks in the future. But it's certainly a very interesting development.
Suggestion of a separate category for trans athletes. Clearly, there are not as many that we know of to be able to compete, and it then restricts them away from what is currently the main competition.
Yeah, and also, there was never going to be a perfect solution here. Someone was always going to lose. that you couldn't please everyone, and the FINA decision, obviously, it doesn't please everyone, doesn't please Leah Thomas or other trans athletes. One would have thought, but this is the thorny, rocky road that they're going to go along. I can't. Can you see a situation where everyone's going to be happy, guys?
Well, at the heart of it, it comes down to respecting the also personal wishes and also the welfare of the athletes too. The FINA policy says that this ban on transgender and intersex women competing in women's competition takes effect if they didn't begin medical treatment to suppress testosterone production either before the onset of puberty or by the age of 12. That's whichever comes later.
I mean, I think if when we're seeing the likelihood of legislation to prevent under 16s taking hormones to transition, I think what this effectively does is rules out anyone who transitions from taking part in female competition in the future. And I think what FINA have done is they've sort of set themselves up as an example, which I think a lot of other sports are probably going to follow now.
And we have also been hearing from the World Athletics President, Seb Coe, who's been saying the decision of swimming's governing body does seem to be in the best interest of sport. So we could see athletics following swimming with very similar policies.
Yeah, we've had the International Rugby League. They've adopted the same policy. I've been speaking to a senior person at FIFA about football's policy. I think they're still in consultation, but I think what they will either follow the swimming lead, or they will do something which the International Cycling Union did a couple of weeks ago and reduce the amount of testosterone levels that are permitted. So it was 5, take it down to 2.5 nanomoles per litre, which is the sort of top level of testosterone that appears naturally in women. It'd be an interesting way to say which way football goes on that. But I should point out that we're talking about elite competition. That's different from grassroots. So Debbie Hewitt, the chairwoman of the Football Association, said this week that it's about fairness as well as competition and inclusion, fairness as well as inclusion. But she did say it's likely to have a different approach from grassroots to elite football. And I think the German Football Association, they've come out this week as well and with their own policy, but this is for amateur football.
Yeah, the DFB saying actually it'll be up to transgender, intersex or non-binary players to choose for themselves whether to play in men's or women's teams, and they're very much focused on this self-determination. And DFB are saying as long as the sporting activity does not affect the health of the person while they're taking medication, the person can take part in the game, which is why the new regulation excludes doping relevance. So the DFB coming out ahead of FIFA. I mean, it really is waiting for FIFA to come to a position to take a global lead on this, to guide 211 member associations, really. Of course, one of the most high-profile examples that ended up at the Court of Arbitration for Sport was in athletics with the South African runner Caster Semenya.
Yeah, that was a sort of very almost that case sort of focus a lot of minds in sport around transgender athletes. Now, Caster Semenya is not a transgender athlete. She has differences of sexual development, DSD, and I actually thought at the time of the CAS case that there was a very good argument that was put forward by Roger Pionk Jr., who's an American sports and political scientist. He said that he was encouraging athletics to take on this thing that anybody who's been raised as a girl from birth should be allowed to compete as a woman. And I thought that was a really good way of tackling
Roger was
issue.
part of Caster's team at CAS, though, right? Is that correct? Yeah.
She was, yeah. As was Ross Tucker, actually. He was also part of Caster's team, and Ross Tucker has been one of the people who's advised World Rugby to bring in the rule about not having transgender women players who've gone through male puberty playing in women's rugby. So, but I think that would allow people who've been raised as girls to stay as women and to compete as women. And I think that was for me. That I thought that's quite a good way of tackling.
What does that mean? Raises girls in a DSD scenario, or raises girls more broadly?
But I mean, raises girls. So, like for Casa Semenya, which she was raised as a girl. She was always seen as a girl
She still is,
and as a
and she
woman. It
still
was
is,
only
isn't she? She is.
yeah, she absolutely still is. It's only until World Athletics decided that she should be referred to as biologically male that that took on a sort of different because of her chromosomes that took on different connotations.
And you can listen back to a couple of episodes where we go a lot more in depth on the whole transgender participation issue from last June, where we spoke to a couple of experts, and also when we spoke to Sharon Davis back in March as well. Well, moving on now to the location that Martyn is at. He's speaking to us from Headingley, where England are currently playing New Zealand in the second test of the cricket series. So what's it been like there at Headingley? At one point last year, there'd have been no prospect of actually England hosting games there because of the fallout from the Azim Rafiq racism scandal.
Absolutely. It's in fact, as I was walking into the ground, just about the first person I saw was the Yorkshire chairman, Lord Patel. And I said, oh, how's it feeling? And he said, oh, well, it's only just sunk in the enormity of what they've achieved and managing to get this test match on after being stripped of that, the privilege initially. So I think it's a sort of big day for Yorkshire, but also a sort of it's also been a sort of focal point for complaints over the ECB, the England and Wales Cricket Board's inquiry into the whole scandal, and sort of questions being raised about why it wasn't a properly independent investigation, because it should really have looked at the ECB's own involvement in it, and that really people believe that hasn't been tackled adequately.
And the latest step is the ECB have charged 7 individuals, haven't they? And we're waiting the outcome of that.
And Yorkshire, the club itself. So that's a sort of disciplinary process. I mean, the ECB would probably insist that it's a sort of arm's length disciplinary commission, but it's still under their auspices. So I think it's a fair enough point. Roger Hutton, the former Yorkshire chairman, made it. He said, look, the ECB knew about the Azim Rafiq allegations before he did and didn't do anything and didn't support them, didn't take it seriously. Why is that? And, we love to talk about the independent regulators on this program, on this podcast, don't we, Tariq? And
we do. But I tell you, I got quite. You're in Yorkshire. You're at this. Just are people a little bit? How are they feeling about all of this? Obviously, you got to make the public statements. You got to say, this racism has to be kicked out. Yorkshire has changed, and all. But do Yorkshire people feel a little bit under siege at all? What's the vibe, as it were? People think they're a bunch of racists, don't they?
I think Yorkshire County members feel a lot of them feel very defensive about this, and they believe that the full story hasn't come out and they've been unfairly labelled. But talking to people who go and watch it who aren't specifically members, I think they think it's a sort of embarrassing episode for the county, and something that's better that it's come out and be dealt with, and hopefully be a positive step for the whole game.
This is an investigation that began in 2020. Rafiq talking about the culture of racism that he experienced while playing for Yorkshire, the derogatory terms that were directed towards him, and just the all-round discrimination he said Asian players felt there. And of course, you mentioned Lord Patel. He is part of the changes at Yorkshire, isn't he? The new chairman who's coming in recent months.
Yeah, he was a former director of the ECB. He stepped down and he was asked he's from Yorkshire, and he was asked to come in and take over. And it's been a sort of a pretty difficult time. That they sacked a lot of people. They're then hit with a lot of unfair dismissal claims, which could be very, very costly. But I think they probably had to take those decisions and accept that there were going to be these claims. Otherwise, the county would have gone bust, I think, if it wasn't hosting events like this.
But to think cricket more broadly, guys, I find it very hard to think this is a very isolated issue within Yorkshire, if I'm honest. This is the club that is under the microscope, the one with all the claims and all the cases you guys have just referenced. Is there is a wider review of cricket, is there, or of culture across the sport, or not really? Or is this going to be, damn you, Yorkshire, let's move on?
There's a review of dressing room culture, which is one of the things that's taking place, but not a sort of wider review of cricket itself. And I think that's what some people think should have happened. Actually, a bit like the sort of the review of football governance, the fan-led review that took place after the Super League thing. There should have been a similar look for the whole of cricket.
Yeah, you just worry if this just kind of touches the sides and there's this one moment, and then people move on again. Sometimes you need these big moments, because even if it is happening elsewhere or happened elsewhere, it will be stamped up because people will be too afraid of what's happened to these guys happening to them, rather than them not being racist. They'll just not want to face what Yorkshire did, perhaps.
As we saw with the way the ECB reacted to the whole investigation, all the concerns that Rafiq came forward with initially, and their slowness to act.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the departure of the ECB chief executive Tom Harrison's probably partly linked to this whole issue and the fact that it wasn't dealt with properly at the time. They would probably deny that and say he always wanted to go, but I think it was probably a fairly uncomfortable time for him.
Departures in football as well, perhaps not that surprising. Chelsea, Marina Granovskaya and Bruce Buck, long-time allies of Roman Abramovich, the chairman, and Marina, the director, responsible for football affairs, transfers and the like. They're on their way. Anyone surprised by that?
Where it seemed like an inevitability once the takeover went through, a month or so ago now. Todd Boehly, the new part owner of Chelsea, the co-owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he's now installed himself not only as chairman, but interim sporting director too.
Can you believe that he's going to be sporting director as well as everything else?
Well, also, qualifications. I just think people get very excited about coming into football, and, it's the middle of the transfer market. And, if I'm an agent or whatever, I don't know, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. But, this usually doesn't end well.
I mean, it is getting thrown in at the deep end, isn't it? In a transfer window, a time when they've got to try to climb up back to the top again, to try to overhaul Liverpool, Manchester City in the Premier League alone, and Romelu Lukaku to move on and other deals to be there. And there he is. I mean, I'm sure he's been studying it from afar, but actually being there in the thick of it as a newcomer will be an interesting moment for him face-to-face with some of the agencies getting to know, and directors of other clubs too that he's doing business with, or trying to at least.
Yeah, it could be a sort of terrible failure. It could be a roaring success, or somewhere in between. Obviously, that's like I just given every single option there, which is a bit stupid. But I think to be chairman and interim sporting director,
they're looking for a centre forward as well now. Lukaku's gone. Maybe he could do a job for the last 10 minutes if they need a goal.
Well, perhaps some research you might want to look at when it's assessing just what value you can get in the transfer market and how it translates to the points was done by you, wasn't it, Martyn, this week, showing actually what Manchester United, bottom of the Premier League table for return on money spent and wages and transfers. Who was top of that?
Liverpool, actually. This was quite an interesting thing I did with Kieran Maguire, football finance guy, and Omar Chowdhury from 21st Group, where we sort of looked at the wages and transfer spending of all the Premier League clubs, and not just over the transfer spending over the last season, but the amortization, so like over the last few seasons. And in a way, some of these things are sort of obvious in that you'd say, yes, obviously Manchester United performed really badly. But actually, just quite how badly they did, compared to the money spent, I thought was pretty remarkable. So they got 19 points less than they should have got based on their spending levels.
Well, we heard from Richard Arnold himself, the Manchester United chief executive, in the last week, where he talks about they'd burn through £1 billion. Although we heard these comments actually with him talking at a pub with Manchester United fans who secretly recorded him, which seems a bit harsh. I mean, completely out of order, I would say, on the fans who he's actually chosen to engage with, and they've recorded him. Yes, some journalists do undertaking undercover recording when you need to try and expose something that can't be uncovered another way. But it seemed like a moment Richard Arnold tried to engage and gave a realistic state of affairs at the club. He was turned over a bit, wasn't he, by the fans?
Yeah, I suppose he was in good faith. But there's also this issue about the fans showing up at the homes of executives, players, where their families are as well. And I think that's why he took them to the pub. It can't be the most comfortable situation. I guess he won't be doing that again, and that probably when fans are asking for more engagement, probably isn't the best. But maybe clubs should have more of these opportunities. Maybe not in the pub down the road from your house, but at the stadium, to talk and engage with fans in a more open and transparent way. Then we don't have to have this type of thing happening.
Yeah, other interesting points. I mean, I think in a way you know who's going to be near the top, but yeah, Spurs were the second highest performers, and then Brentford, West Ham, and Brighton.
Martyn, where were Manchester City? Because they've obviously been spending very carefully over the years, and tight budget there. How have they done on that table?
Yeah, so obviously they won the Premier League, Manchester City, so they've done pretty well. They were sixth in the list, and down the bottom also Everton, which again is probably not a surprise given how much money they've spent, and Watford. And actually Everton, if you looked at it in another way, they were also, you could also claim they were the worst performing club, because in terms of where they finished in the table, which was 16th, that is the biggest disparity from where they are on the spending table. So they were 8th in the spending table, but 16th in the actual table at the end of the season. So a lot of work there to do to turn that club around.
There's been another takeover as well in the world of football, and a prolific buyer of football teams, a guy called John Textor, an American guy. He owns a bit of Crystal Palace. He bought Botafogo in Brazil, because clubs there are, in the last couple of years, you're able to invest in those. And he's probably his biggest investment so far is buying almost all of the stake in Lyon. So after Paris Saint-Germain, I would argue Lyon with Marseille are the next biggest teams in France. And this guy is collecting a constellation. Wicket.
Wicket, sorry.
This guy's collecting a constellation of football teams. I'm not sure how successful he's going to be, but again, it's another example of this multi-club model.
What sort of value are we looking at with this takeover? What does it price Lyon at?
Prices Lyon at almost $1 billion. For me, slightly surprising, given it's the French league. The TV rights there collapsed. It's got a decent stadium, I suppose. And France have got that extra coefficient place in the Champions League. So maybe so more likelihood of playing in that top competition pushed in there. But I'd like to talk to this. I don't know if either of you two have. I'm not sure what his plans are. He's been quite prolific on Twitter. Last week he asked, I thought it was a bit over the top, he asked for a referee to be sacked in Brazil after a penalty decision, which for me isn't quite normal. But again, he seems quite engaged in these investments.
And Lyon have made big investments in women's football. They're the reigning Champions League winners after beating Barcelona the other week. So that's been an area where they've realised that Lyon, if you target some investment towards that, you can have great success in the women's game, comparatively smaller investment than the men's game to reap the rewards of trophies.
Yeah, that's not the only multi-club takeover that's happening at the moment, because it looks like the City Football Group, Manchester City's owners, are going to buy Palermo, just been promoted to Serie B. So that's another one to add to the list. They've got Melbourne City, Girona, New York City FC, Yokohama. So just what is the reason, do you think, for buying all these clubs? What does it do for the City Football Group?
For most of them, like the team in Uruguay, for example, Torquay in Uruguay, tiny team, Palermo, Serie B, these are, for me, potentially staging posts for moving talent around, growing talent maybe. with Manchester City, the main beneficiary of the best players. Maybe we haven't seen too much flow though between these teams yet. Apart from that, they're not enormous. They're not going to be big teams in the leagues they're in. So it's quite hard to see that beyond this kind of transfer talent market academy situation. Can you see anything else?
I don't know. Do you know? Is it possible in terms of like if you're spending a lot of money, can you spread your spending in terms of FFP calculations? Can you spread it a bit wider?
Yeah, I mean that's what some people have speculated about this, but what a complex way of financial fair play, I guess. But they do have the opportunity to do that. They got the wherewithal, they've got the reach, and Manchester City have been embroiled in financial fair play controversy, for such a long time. Maybe again, it would be. It's just so hard to pin anything down when it comes to FFP, and who's looking.
Of course, Manchester City insist it's all about building an umbrella of network of clubs and not to do with any sort of financial regulations at all, as they sort of seek to expand to multiple countries and build up the group. As for
yeah, but who's going to see? Sorry, just on that. But who is going to see these tiny teams that Man City own? What when they're building this group up? Like, I can't imagine in 15, 20 years going to be an enormous appeal to go and watch Palermo, even if they've been in Serie A, but they're not going to be this enormous football club. Same as the one in Uruguay. They were looking to get one in the Netherlands, and there was a protest, if I remember, and they were stopped from buying that because the fans protested there. The idea of what you just said, having this group of global clubs, it's not to have successful football teams that are going to be champion teams in their league by the sounds of it, though. You got maybe in the MLS, New York City, Japan, Yokohama, perhaps, but what's the point of the rest of these?
It's also an outpost of Abu Dhabi. You've got your flag in each of those countries in whatever sort of scale. And, well, as we've seen with Qatar and Paris Saint-Germain, they've yet to buy any additional clubs. Qatar only has the one club under the PSG umbrella still, and it's a challenging enough time for the French champions. We have been hearing this week from Nasser Al-Khelaifi. He's been going on a bit of a media tour across Europe, suddenly saying that they don't want to be flashy bling bling, trying to move away from this celebrity image, but it's not really reflected with the signings or how they run the club, really, I would say, at the moment, unless this is a new direction we're yet to see. And we certainly see the frustration spill over when they go out of competitions like the Champions League they're trying to win.
Is he talking about the fact that they didn't go for Zidane? To me, that's like a flashy signing. They're going to go for a sort of Galtier, who's a sort of less high-profile person. Maybe it's that. But yeah, when you've got Messi and Neymar and Mbappe, I don't think you can say you're not bling bling.
No, and I think Neymar recently renewed his contract this week, and obviously Mbappe, we talked about that. He's there for another 3 years. But Nasser Al-Khelaifi is again such an interesting figure, isn't he? With those jobs, multiple jobs. Man with perhaps the most jobs in football, given the fact he runs BIN, runs PSG, head of the ECA, European Clubs Association, UEFA board member. I mean, you run out of breath trying to say all of that in one go. But his those ties sort of came up recently, didn't they? There was the ruling finally after 3 months, the UEFA disciplinary investigation into his behaviour and Paris Saint-Germain's former sporting director Leonardo's behaviour after their elimination in the Champions League to Real Madrid in March. We finally got a conclusion last Friday, late in the evening, in the middle of a disciplinary pack with other announcements. It was kind of slipped in there. What did it say?
Well, it made no mention of him. There was none at all. We knew initially that he'd been charged, but then when it came to the verdict, obviously no mention at all. We just discovered the now departed sporting director has a one-match ban from European competition, but no mention of Al-Khelaifi, was there in it?
No, and a 10 grand fine. And you know what I found interesting? There's loads of interesting things with this, and things we'll probably never know how the disciplinary machinery of UEFA works. It's quite opaque. But normally, and I've been following this because UEFA have been very helpful throughout this season, they'll email the press every couple of weeks when the disciplinary group has gone through their analysis, and they tell us, who's going to be investigated and who's been punished. And normally these things take 2 or 3 weeks. This thing took 3 months, and we didn't get an email or any advice that this has happened. It was just kind of slipped into the document. I wonder why they wanted to do that.
Well, I did get messaged around the fact there was a document in existence without the actual specifics, but yes, they do often send around.
No, there is. It's on. You can see it. I'm not saying a document doesn't exist. It's online. What I'm saying is that they would email the press every time the disciplinary sanctions are out, and just for this case, for this current, we just didn't get any, and it was Friday night at 7. It was very odd.
Yeah, I think UEFA should have announced it specifically, because it's there's too many connections for it to. They need to be above completely transparent when it is something like this. One of their own executive committee members being investigated. Why not be transparent?
It's a really good question, and and they get frustrated when people ask these questions, but I'm sure they see it too. And the longer people don't talk about it, the more the kind of fire and the flames sort of burn, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, from Qatari investment in sport to Saudi backing, and the Live Golf controversy does continue, and another departure from the PGA Tour to them this week. Brooks Koepka has gone, and amid a outcry from Rory McIlroy, one of the most high-profile players to reject the riches on offer from the Saudi-backed Rebel Tour.
Yeah, it's quite a big blow for the PGA that he was like 19th in the world. He's only 32. One of the sort of top young stars. So I think they'll have been really sort of devastated that he's leaving. And then you've got his brother's already there, obviously Dustin Johnson. So it's I think it'll be a really big one for Liv, because they'll think, the people who claim that this is a tour mainly of sort of has-beens and veterans. Look, we've got some young people, so there's a lot of money, isn't there? Huge amounts of money, and they're dangling this cash carrot, and it's working.
And John Moynihan, the PGA tour head, he made the point. Look, we can't compete. We've heard this in football as well, haven't we? I suppose we can't compete if a nation state is trying to buy golf, which is what's happening. We're not even going to get into that. But there have been some. It's pushed the PGA Tour to try and make some changes. But there's no way that any kind of sports organisation is able to organically compete with a nation state intent on buying a sport. And I guess that's what we're seeing. And then Brooks Koepka, it's kind of reputation shredding, at least in the short term, because he last week was having a go at the press for asking questions about Live Golf, saying it's creating a dark cloud and a distraction. Pretty much suggesting that wasn't something he was going to do, and that was only a week ago. And then here we are, introducing your new signing.
Yeah, it's not gone down well with golfers like McIlroy, and we're now counting down to the second event on the Live Golf Series. It goes to the United States and Portland, Oregon, and obviously interesting if they do sign any more players before then. Well, one high-profile sports star who's been in Saudi Arabia this week is Anthony Joshua, along with Alexander Usyk, because they've been holding their press conference ahead of their boxing world heavyweight title rematch, which is going to be in Jeddah on August the 20th. And sports washing did come up, and Joshua said didn't know what it was, and he did talk about how he's treated really well in Saudi Arabia. All that allegation stuff, for me, I'm not caught up in any of it. And he said, I'm here to have a good time and bring entertainment to Saudi. But he doesn't know what sports washing is.
Well, no. I mean, he pretty much is doing it as he's saying those quotes in a way. If you want to think about it, that's a man who is being treated very well, being paid handsomely, endorsing a regime looking to rebrand its image. So, from Saudi Arabia, thank you to Anthony Joshua.
Yeah, this is Anthony Joshua, who, quite interestingly, been with Sky all his career since he turned professional. Now has gone with DAZN, and part of the deal for that is he gets some shares. He becomes a shareholder. I don't think he's going to get any dividends in the next in the next few months, is he? Because this is DAZN, who we've mentioned before, have just about every year have reported huge losses.
Well, yeah, more than $1 billion for the last couple of years. So he'll be waiting a while for his payout. Be interesting to see what happens with DAZN. But anyway, Joshua doesn't really need those dividends, does he? What did he say? Rafi's being treated quite well at the moment by Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and it's going to be pretty hot there in August for that fight, and heated perhaps not just in the ring, but also as the questions that Joshua might be facing. But that about brings an end to this week's episode of Sport Unlocked. For myself, Rob Harris, from Tariq Panja, and from Martyn Ziegler, keeping an eye on the cricket at Headingley.
Great stuff, guys.
As ever, you can message us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But for now, enjoy the sport coming up. Goodbye for now.